Jake Miller sat in his office on the 47th floor of the Earth Sports Center, watching the rain fall against the glass windows. He had been Earth's athletic director for the Galactic Sports Federation for 3 years now, and those 3 years had been nothing but disappointment. Earth's athletes always came in last place in every competition they entered. The other alien species in the galaxy were simply too strong, too fast, and too skilled. The Korathians could run faster than any human had ever dreamed possible. Veltok could lift weights that would crush a human instantly. The Zendari could swim through liquid methane like it was nothing at all. Compared to them, humans looked like weak children trying to play games meant for giants. Jake rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the latest competition results on his computer screen. Earth had placed dead last in 17 different events. At the recent Andromeda Games, the galactic news networks were calling humans the weakest species ever to embarrass competitive sports. Some alien commentators even suggested that Earth should be removed from the Federation entirely. The communication device on Jake's desk suddenly began to flash with a bright blue light. He pressed the answer button, and a holographic image appeared. In the air above his desk, the image showed a tall, crystalline creature with skin that looked like it was made of blue diamonds. Its eyes glowed with a cold white light, and when it spoke, its voice sounded like breaking glass. "I am Commander Vex Kral of the Zephyrian Empire," the creature said. "I speak for the Zephyrian Sports Authority and all the champions of our world." Jake had heard of the Zephyrians before. They were 8 feet tall and incredibly strong. Their bodies were covered in a natural armor made of crystal-like material that made them nearly impossible to hurt. They had won more galactic sports competitions than any other species in the last 100 years. Most other aliens were afraid to even compete against them. "What can I do for you, Commander?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "The Zephyrians." Crystalline face twisted into what might have been a smile, but it looked more like someone breaking rocks with a hammer. "We have watched your pathetic human athletes fail again and again in our galactic competitions. Your species brings shame to the entire Federation with your weakness and inability to compete at even the most basic levels." Jake felt his face grow hot with anger, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Is there a point to this conversation, Commander?" "Indeed there is," Vex Kral replied. "We offer your weak species one final chance to prove that humans deserve to remain in the Galactic Sports Federation. We challenge Earth to send your 10 best athletes to compete in the ancient Zephyrian gladiatorial games on our homeworld." Jake's heart sank. The Zephyrian gladiatorial games were legendary throughout the galaxy. They were brutal competitions that had been running for over 1,000 years. No non-Zephyrian species had ever won even a single event in those games. Most species that tried ended up with their athletes seriously injured or worse. "And if we refuse?" Jake asked. "If you refuse, we will petition the Galactic Sports Federation to remove Earth from all competitions permanently. Your species will be banned from participating in any galactic sport for the next 50 years. The commander's glowing eyes seemed to grow brighter. "But if you accept our challenge and somehow manage to win, the Zephyrian Empire will provide your world with advanced training facilities and sports technology worth more than your entire planet's economy." Jake stared at the holographic image in shock. The Zephyrians were basically offering Earth either complete humiliation or incredible wealth. There was no middle ground. What exactly would these games involve? "The ancient trials will test your athletes in 5 areas: pure strength, maximum speed, endurance beyond limits, strategic combat, and the will to survive. The competitions will take place in our Grand Coliseum on Zephyr Prime, before an audience of millions. The entire galaxy will watch as your weak humans are crushed by superior Zephyrian champions. And if our athletes get hurt during these games, Vexcrowl's crystal-like laugh sounded like someone dropping a box of glass bottles. "Commander Miller, your athletes will definitely get hurt. The only question is how badly. But do not worry. We will provide the best medical care available to keep them alive." Jake felt sick to his stomach. This was clearly a trap designed to humiliate humanity even further. The Zephyrians wanted to prove once and for all that humans had no business competing in galactic sports. They wanted to crush Earth's athletes so completely that no other species would ever take humans seriously again. But Jake also knew what those advanced training facilities could mean for Earth. The technology the Zephyrians were offering could revolutionize human athletics. It could give future generations of Earth athletes the tools they needed to compete on equal terms with alien species. The question was whether it was worth risking the lives and dignity of his current athletes to get it. "How long do we have?" "To decide?" Jake asked. "You have 7 Earth days to give us your answer," Vexcrowl replied. "If you accept, your athletes must arrive on Zephyr Prime within 30 days. The games will begin immediately upon their arrival." The holographic image flickered and disappeared, leaving Jake alone in his office with the sound of rain against the windows. He looked out at the city below, where millions of humans went about their daily lives, completely unaware that their species' future in galactic sports might depend on a decision he had to make in the next week. Jake picked up his phone and began making calls. If Earth was going to accept this insane challenge, he would need to assemble the best team of athletes the planet had ever seen. He would need people who were not just physically gifted, but mentally tough enough to face impossible odds without. Breaking down Dot as he dialed the first number, Jake wondered if he was about to save humanity's reputation in the galaxy or lead Earth's finest athletes to their destruction on an alien world. Either way, there was no turning back now. Jake Miller spent the next 3 days making phone calls to athletes all over the world. Most of them thought he was crazy when he explained the situation. A few hung up on him immediately. But slowly, one by one, he managed to convince 10 of Earth's best athletes to join what might be the most dangerous team in human history. Lisa Brooks was the first to say yes. She was the fastest woman on Earth and had broken 3 world records in sprinting. When Jake called her at her training facility in California, she listened to his explanation in complete silence. "So let me understand this correctly," Lisa said when he finished. "These crystal aliens want to beat us up in front of the entire galaxy to prove that humans are worthless at sports." "That's basically correct," Jake replied. "And if we lose, Earth gets banned from all galactic sports for 50 years? "Yes." "And if we somehow win, we get technology that could change human athletics forever?" "That's right." Lisa was quiet for a long moment, and she laughed. "Well, I've always wanted to race aliens. Count me in." Tony Garcia was harder to convince. The heavyweight boxer had never lost a professional fight, but he had also never fought anyone who wasn't human. When Jake explained that Zephyrians were 8 feet tall and covered in crystal armor, Tony whistled softly. "That sounds like punching a wall," Tony said. "A very big, very angry wall." "The medical care will be the best in the galaxy," Jake offered. Weakly, "Jake, I've been punching people for 15 years. I know what it feels like to hit something that doesn't want to be hit, but I've never tried to punch a rock." Tony paused. "But if these aliens think they can scare humans away from competition, they're about to learn something new about Earth. I'm in." Kate Adams was practicing her gymnastics routine when Jake reached her. The small, athletic woman could bend her body in ways that seemed impossible. She had won gold medals in 4 different Olympic events and was known for her incredible balance and flexibility. "Crystal skin?" Kate asked when Jake described the Zephyrians. "Does that mean they're probably not very flexible?" "That's what we're hoping," Jake said. "Good. Rigid things break when you apply the right pressure in the right places. I'll show." them what human flexibility can do. Ryan Clark was running his daily marathon when Jake's call came through his earpiece. The distance runner barely seemed out of breath, even though he had been running for over 2 hours. Endurance competitions? Ryan asked between steady breaths. Against aliens who are stronger and faster than humans? I know it sounds impossible, Jake said. Actually, it sounds interesting. Strong, fast creatures usually can't maintain peak performance for very long. Their bodies burn too much energy too quickly. Humans are built for endurance, Jake. We're not the fastest or strongest, but we can keep going when other species collapse. Sign me up. Amy Foster was swimming laps in an Olympic pool when Jake reached her. The triathlete was one of the few humans who had actually placed in the top 10 at a galactic swimming event, though she had still finished far behind the alien competitors. Water sports? Amy asked, floating on her back in the pool. Do Zephyrians even swim? We don't know much about their abilities in water, Jake admitted. Then we might have an advantage there. Crystal armor sounds heavy. Heavy things sink. I'm definitely interested. The rest of the team came together over the next 2 days. Carlos Martinez was a rock climber and parkour expert who could move through urban environments like he was flying. Sam Johnson was a weightlifter who held several Earth records, though his best lifts would probably look like warm-ups to a Zephyrian. Nina Roberts was a martial artist who specialized in fighting multiple opponents at once. Luke Thompson was a former military strategist who had become a sports analyst and coach. With his team assembled, Jake faced the problem of training them for competitions they knew nothing about. The Zephyrians had told them almost nothing about what the actual games would involve. All they knew was that the competitions would test strength, speed, endurance, strategy, and survival. Jake contacted Dr. Helen Davis, a scientist who had spent years studying alien biology. She arrived at the training facility with boxes full of research data about Zephyrian physiology. The good news is that they're not completely invincible, Dr. Davis told the assembled team. Their crystal skin makes them incredibly strong and resistant to damage, but it also makes them less flexible than most organic species. Their joints don't bend as easily as human joints do. What about their speed and strength? Lisa asked. They're definitely faster and stronger than humans in short bursts, but their high-density muscle structure requires more energy to maintain. They probably can't sustain peak performance as long as humans can. So we need to find ways to make competitions last longer, Ryan said thoughtfully. Exactly. And there's something else. Zephyrian culture values predictability and perfection. Their athletes train using precise, repeated movements until they can perform them perfectly every time. They don't adapt well to unexpected situations. Luke Thompson leaned forward with interest. You're saying they don't handle surprises well? That's correct. Human unpredictability might be your biggest advantage. Zephyrians expect their opponents to follow logical, predictable patterns. When opponents do something unexpected, it seems to confuse them. The team spent the next 3 weeks training harder than they had ever trained in their lives. They practiced in zero-gravity chambers to prepare for the possibility of alien environments. They studied holographic recordings of previous Zephyrian games, watching alien after alien get crushed by the Crystal Warriors. But Jake noticed something in those recordings that gave him hope. Every time an alien competitor tried something unexpected, even if they lost, the Zephyrian athletes seemed to hesitate for just a moment. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. We can't beat them with strength or speed, Jake told his team on their last day of training. But we might be able to beat them by being human, by being unpredictable, adaptable, and too stubborn to quit when things look hopeless. So our strategy is to be ourselves? Tony asked with a grin. Our strategy is to show the galaxy what humans can do when everyone expects us to fail, Jake replied. The next morning, they boarded the transport ship that would carry them to Zephyr Prime. As Earth grew smaller behind them, Jake wondered if he was leading his team to victory or disaster. Either way, the galaxy was about to learn something new about humanity. The transport ship landed on Zephyr Prime with a loud thud that shook everyone inside. Jake Miller looked out the window and felt his heart sink. The planet's surface was covered in massive crystal formations that reached up toward the purple sky like giant fingers. Everything seemed to glow with a cold blue light that made the world look like the inside of a frozen cave. "Well, this place looks friendly," Tony Garcia said, trying to make a joke. But his voice sounded nervous. Team gathered their equipment and walked down the ship's ramp onto the alien world. The air was thin and cold, and it smelled like metal and electricity. In the distance, they could see the Grand Colosseum rising up from the crystal landscape like a mountain made of blue glass. Commander, Vex Krall was waiting for them with a group of other Zephyrians. Up close, the aliens looked even more intimidating than they had in the holographic message. Their crystal skin caught the planet's strange light and threw it back in sharp, bright flashes. When they moved, Jake could hear their footsteps ringing against the ground like hammers hitting stone. "So these are the weak humans who think they can compete in our sacred games," Vex Krall said. His voice carried easily across the landing area, even though he was standing 50 feet away. "They look even more pathetic than I expected." The other Zephyrians made sounds that might have been laughter, but it sounded more like breaking glass mixed with falling rocks. Jake stepped forward and tried to keep his voice steady. "We're here to compete, Commander. When do the games begin?" "Immediately," Vex Krall replied. "We see no reason to delay your inevitable humiliation. Follow us to the Colosseum. The galaxy is waiting to watch you fail." The walk to the arena took 20 minutes, and with each step, Jake could see more and more Zephyrians gathering to watch. They lined the crystal pathways and filled the air above with floating platforms. By the time the human team reached the Colosseum, there were thousands of aliens watching their every move. The Grand Colosseum was bigger than anything Jake had ever seen. The arena floor was the size of 10 football fields, and the seating areas rose up so high that the top levels disappeared into the purple sky. Strange equipment and obstacles covered the arena floor, most of it made from the same blue crystal as everything else on the planet Dot. As they entered the competitor area, Jake could hear the crowd noise washing over them like a wave. There were easily 100,000 Zephyrians in the stands, and all of them seemed to be calling for human blood. "Ladies and gentlemen of the galaxy," a voice boomed across the arena, somehow speaking in perfect English. "Today we witness the final proof the humans have no place in galactic sports. These 10 weak creatures from Earth have foolishly accepted our challenge. They will now be crushed completely in the ancient trials that have proven Zephyrian superiority for 1,000 years." The crowd roared its approval, and Jake felt the sound hit him like a physical force. He looked at his team and saw fear in some of their eyes, but also determination. They had come too far to back down now. "The first trial will test pure speed," the announcer continued. "Lisa Brooks of Earth will face Kethzar, our fastest warrior, in a 400-meter race through the crystal maze." Lisa stepped forward, her face pale, but her jaw set with determination. The crystal maze was a course filled with obstacles and barriers that changed shape as runners moved through them. Gravity fields could suddenly shift, making runners feel like they weighed twice as much or were floating in the air. Kethzar was even taller than the other Zephyrians, with long legs that looked like they were built for running. When he moved to the starting line, his crystal skin seemed to shimmer with contained energy. "This is going to be bad," Amy whispered to Jake. The starting signal sounded like a thunderclap. Kethzar shot forward like he had been fired from a cannon. Lisa ran as fast as she had ever run in her life, But within seconds, the Zephyrian was already 20 feet ahead of her. But then something interesting happened. The maze began to shift and change, just as it was designed to do. Kethzar ran straight into a new barrier that had appeared in his path. He stopped, looked around in confusion, then carefully found a way around it. Lisa, meanwhile, saw the barrier forming and immediately changed direction. She had been expecting the maze to shift, because that was what mazes did. She slid under a low obstacle, jumped over a pit that opened up in front of her, and kept running even when the gravity field tried to pull her sideways. She was still losing. But she was losing by less than anyone had expected. The crowd's cheering began to sound less certain. Kethzar won the race by 30 seconds, which was a huge margin. But Lisa had done something no other non-Zephyrian had ever done in the Crystal Maze. She had actually adapted to the changing course, instead of just reacting to it. Interesting, Commander Vex Kral said, his glowing eyes fixed on Lisa as she walked back to her team. The human female seemed to expect the changes. The second trial was a test of pure strength. San Johnson faced Mortek, a Zephyrian who looked like he was built from solid rock. The competition involved lifting increasingly. Heavy crystal blocks using equipment designed for Zephyrian physiology. Sam knew he was going to lose this one badly. The first weight that Mortek lifted would have crushed Sam instantly. But Sam had noticed something about the equipment. It was designed for beings with crystal skin and rigid joints. The grips were shaped wrong for flexible human hands. So Sam did something unexpected. Instead of trying to lift the weights the same way Mortek did, he changed his grip, used his flexibility to get better leverage, and found ways to use the equipment that its designers had never intended. He still lost, but he lasted much longer than anyone thought possible. And more importantly, he made Mortek work harder than the Zephyrian had ever worked before. The third trial was combat. Tony Garcia stepped into the ring with Dex Foray, a Zephyrian warrior whose fists looked like they could punch through steel walls. The fight was brutal and short, but Tony managed to do something that shocked everyone in the arena. He landed 3 solid punches on Dexvor's crystal skin. The punches didn't seem to hurt the alien, but they made him stagger backward. No non-Zephyrian had ever made a Zephyrian warrior step backward in combat. As the first day of trials ended, Jake looked at his battered team and realized something important. They were losing every event, just as everyone expected. But they were losing in ways that the Zephyrians had never seen before. And for the first time since arriving on this crystal world, Jake began to think they might actually have a chance. The second day of the games began with a different feeling in the air. The Zephyrian crowd was still huge and still hostile, but Jake could sense that something had changed. The aliens were no longer completely certain the humans would be easily crushed. Commander Vex Kral stood at the center of the arena, his crystal skin gleaming under the strange purple sky. His voice boomed across the Colosseum as he announced the day's events. "Today we begin the team trials," he declared. "These competitions will prove once and for all that human weakness cannot be overcome by working together. Prepare to witness the final destruction of Earth's foolish hopes." But Jake noticed that Vex Kral's voice didn't sound quite as confident as it had the day before. The human team had lost every individual event, but they had done it in ways that made the Zephyrians work harder than expected. More importantly, they had shown the galaxy that humans didn't give up easily. The first team event was called the Labyrinth Challenge. 3 athletes from each team had to navigate through a massive maze that changed its shape every few minutes. The goal was to collect 5 energy cores hidden throughout the labyrinth and return them to the starting point. The twist was that the maze was 3-dimensional, with pathways that went up walls and across ceilings. Jake chose Nia Roberts, Carlos Martinez, and Amy Foster for this challenge. Nina's martial arts training had taught her to think in 3, dimensions during combat. Carlos could move through complex environments better than almost any human alive. Amy's swimming and triathlon experience had given her excellent spatial awareness. The Zephyrian team consisted of 3 warriors who moved with perfect coordination. They had trained together for years and could communicate without speaking. As soon as the challenge began, they moved through the maze like a single organism, taking the most direct routes to each energy core. But the human team did something completely different. Instead of trying to follow the obvious paths, Carlos immediately began climbing the walls. He used his parkour skills to find routes that the maze designers had never intended anyone to use. When he reached the ceiling, he discovered that the energy cores were visible from above. "Nina, left wall 30 feet up," Carlos called down. "Amy, there's a water channel that leads directly to the 3rd core." The Zephyrians had never considered that competitors might ignore the intended pathways. Their perfect coordination became a disadvantage because they were all trying to use the same routes that everyone else had used for hundreds of years. Nina used her flexibility to squeeze through gaps that the rigid Zephyrians couldn't fit through. Amy discovered that several sections of the maze were filled with water, and she could swim through them much faster than anyone could run around them. When the maze shifted and changed, the human team adapted instantly. They communicated constantly, warning each other about new obstacles and sharing information about shortcuts they discovered. The Zephyrians, meanwhile, had to stop and recalculate their perfect routes every time something changed. For the first time since arriving on Zephyr Prime, humans won an event. The crowd fell completely silent for almost a full minute before erupting in confused noise. "Commander." Vex Kral's glowing eyes were fixed on the human team as they collected their prize. "Impossible," Jake heard him mutter. "No species has ever won the Labyrinth Challenge on their first attempt." The second team event was the Endurance Gauntlet, a brutal 12-hour competition that combined running, swimming, climbing, and puzzle solving. Each team had to work together to complete a series of increasingly difficult challenges, while the artificial environment around them became more and more hostile. Jake sent Ryan Clark, Kate Adams, Sam Johnson, and Lisa Brooks into this competition. Ryan's marathon experience would help with the endurance aspects. Kate's gymnastics background would be crucial for the climbing sections. Sam's strength would be needed for the heavy lifting. Lisa's speed would help them make up time when they fell behind. The Zephyrian team started strong, powering through the first several challenges with their superior strength and speed. But as the hours wore on, something interesting began to happen. The Zephyrians had trained their bodies to perform at peak efficiency. But peak efficiency meant they burned through their energy reserves very quickly. After 6 hours of competition, they began to slow down noticeably. The human team, meanwhile, had paced themselves from the beginning. Ryan had taught them how to conserve energy for long-term effort rather than short bursts of maximum performance. When the Zephyrians started to tire, the humans were still running at a steady pace. "We're actually gaining on them," Kate called out as she swung across a series of hanging obstacles. Her small size and flexibility allowed her to move through the climbing sections much faster than the larger, more rigid Zephyr IANS. By hour 10, the human team had taken the lead. The Zephyrian warriors were still incredibly strong, but they were breathing heavily and moving more slowly than they had at the beginning. The final challenge required all 4 team members to work together to solve a complex puzzle while swimming through a pool filled with thick, gel-like liquid. The Zephyrians' crystal skin, which had been such an advantage in other events, made them sink like rocks in the dense liquid. The human team won the Endurance Gauntlet by almost an hour. Ryan Clark collapsed at the finish line, completely exhausted, but grinning from ear to ear. The third team event was Strategic Combat, a chess-like game played on a massive board where each piece was a living competitor. Luke Thompson served as the human team's commander, directing his teammates as they moved around the board and engaged in brief combat matches with their Zephyrian opponents. This was where human unpredictability became a devastating weapon. Zephyrians had strategies that had been perfected over centuries. They knew exactly how each piece should move and when each attack should be launched. But Luke Thompson ignored all the traditional strategies. He moved his pieces in patterns that made no sense according to conventional wisdom. He sacrificed strong positions to gain temporary advantages. He constantly changed his approach, just when the Zephyrians thought they understood what he was doing. What is he doing? Jake heard one of the Zephyrian coaches ask another. His strategy makes no logical sense. That's exactly the point, Jake said quietly to himself. Tony Garcia and Nina Roberts proved to be devastating in the combat portions of the game. They used techniques that the Zephyrians had never seen before, combining boxing, martial arts, and pure human stubbornness to win fights they should have lost. The human team won strategic combat in a crushing victory that left their Zephyrian opponents looking confused and frustrated. As the second day ended, the overall score was tied. Each side had won 3 events. The arena fell silent as Commander Vex Kral realized what this meant. Tomorrow, he announced, his voice sounding strained, we will hold the Trial of Champions. 1 warrior from each team will compete in the ultimate test of strength, speed, endurance, strategy, and survival. This final challenge will determine the winner of the games. Jake looked at his exhausted but triumphant team. They had done the impossible by proving that humans could compete with the galaxy's most dominant species. But now everything would come down to a single competitor in a single event. I'll do it, Jake said quietly. His team turned to look at him in surprise. Jake, you're not as young as the rest of us, Lisa pointed out. No, Jake agreed. But I've been competing in multi-event competitions longer than anyone. And more importantly, I understand what we've learned here. We can't beat them by being stronger or faster, but we can beat them by being human. The next morning would bring the final challenge that would determine humanity's future in galactic sports. The morning of the final day dawned with an eerie purple light that made everything on Zephyr Prime look like it was covered in shadows. Jake Miller stood at the edge of the arena, looking out at the massive crowd that had gathered to watch the Trial of Champions. Word had spread across the galaxy that humans had actually tied the score with the mighty Zephyrians. Beings from dozens of different worlds had come to witness what many thought was impossible. Jake felt older than his 45 years as he stretched his muscles and prepared for the competition ahead. His knees ached from decades of athletic competition, and his back was stiff from sleeping on an alien bed designed for crystal-skinned warriors. But his mind was clear and focused. Commander Vex Kral approached him across the arena floor, moving with the smooth, controlled steps of a predator. Up close, the Zephyrian leader was even more intimidating than Jake had imagined. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, and his crystal skin seemed to pulse with internal energy. So the old human thinks he can defeat me in single combat, Vex Kral said, his voice echoing across the silent arena. I have won the Trial of Champions 7 times. I have never been defeated by any warrior of any species. There's a first time for everything, Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Vex Kral's crystalline face twisted into what might have been a smile. Today you will learn why the Zephyrian Empire has dominated galactic sports for centuries. You will be crushed so completely that no human will ever dare to challenge us again. The arena announcer's voice boomed across the Colosseum, speaking in a dozen different languages for the galactic audience. The Trial of Champions consists of 5 stages. Each stage tests a different aspect of warrior ability. The competitor who wins the most stages will be declared the victor. Jake looked up at his team in the competitor section. Lisa, Tony, Ryan, Amy, Carlos, Sam, Nina, Kate, and Luke were all watching him with expressions of hope and fear. He had come so far and achieved so much. Now everything depended on him. The first stage was a test of raw physical power. Jake and Vex Crow had to lift increasingly heavy crystal blocks using a machine that measured their maximum strength. Jake knew he would lose this stage badly, but he also knew that wasn't the point. Vex Crow's first lift was heavier than anything Jake could even move. The Zephyrian's crystal muscles seemed to expand as he raised weights that would have crushed a human instantly. When it was Jake's turn, he lifted what he could and tried to conserve his energy for the stages ahead. Stage 1 goes to the Zephyrian champion, the announcer declared. The crowd roared its approval, but Jake noticed something important. Vex Crow had used maximum effort on every single lift, trying to show off his incredible strength. He was already breathing harder than he should have been. The second stage was a speed and agility course that wound through a series of moving obstacles. Runners had to dodge swinging hammers, leap over rising barriers, and navigate through spinning wheels of sharp crystal. Vex Crow attacked the course like a charging bull, using his superior speed to power through each obstacle. But Jake did something different. Instead of trying to match the Zephyrian's pace, he studied the patterns of the moving obstacles and found ways to slip through them without fighting against their motion. When a hammer swung toward him, Jake ducked and let it pass overhead instead of trying to outrun it. When barriers rose in his path, he found gaps to squeeze through instead of jumping over them. When the crystal wheels spun, he timed his movements to flow between the sharp edges. Jake lost the stage, but only by a few seconds. More importantly, he had barely broken a sweat while Vex Crow was beginning to show signs of fatigue. The third stage was an endurance test that lasted for 3 full hours. Both competitors had to run, climb, swim, and solve puzzles while the environment around them became increasingly hostile. The temperature rose and fell dramatically. Artificial storms pelted them with rain and hail, and the ground beneath their feet constantly shifted and changed. This was where Jake's decades of multi-event experience became crucial. He had learned to pace himself through long competitions, to stay mentally focused when his body wanted to give up, and to adapt to changing conditions without losing his rhythm. Vex Crow started the endurance stage like he had started everything else, with maximum effort and perfect technique. But as the hours wore on, his crystal skin began to lose its glow. His movements became less fluid and more mechanical. Jake, meanwhile, settled into the steady, determined pace that had carried him through countless decathlon competitions. He didn't try to match Vex Crow's early speed. Instead, he focused on maintaining consistent effort and staying alert to opportunities. By the end of the third stage, Jake had actually taken the lead. The arena fell completely silent as the impossible happened. A human had outperformed a Zephyrian champion in endurance competition. The fourth stage was strategic combat, a complex game that combined physical fighting with tactical thinking. Each competitor controlled a small army of holographic warriors and had to defeat their opponent through a combination of strategy and personal combat skill. This was where everything Jake had learned about Zephyrian psychology became important. Vex Crow fought exactly the way Dr. Davis had predicted. He used perfect, predetermined strategies that had been refined over centuries of competition. But Jake did what humans do best. He improvised. He changed his strategy every few minutes, forcing Vex Crow to constantly readjust his plans. He used tactics that made no sense according to traditional warfare, but worked because they were completely unexpected. When Vex Crow expected him to attack, Jake retreated. When the Zephyrian prepared for defense, Jake attacked from an angle that no logical strategy would have suggested. He combined boxing techniques with military tactics and gymnastic movements in ways that had never been tried before. Jake won the fourth stage decisively, and for the first time in the competition, Vexcrawl looked genuinely worried. The final stage was called the Test of Will. Both competitors were placed in separate chambers where they faced their greatest fears and deepest doubts. The stage would continue until one of them gave up or collapsed from mental exhaustion. Jake found himself reliving every failure, every disappointment, every moment when he had been told he wasn't good enough. He saw images of his team losing every event, of Earth being banned from galactic sports, of humanity being labeled as the weakest species in the galaxy. But Jake had learned something important during his years as an athlete and a coach. Failure wasn't the end of the story. It was just another obstacle to overcome. He thought about Lisa adapting to the changing maze, about Ryan outlasting opponents who were stronger and faster, about his entire team proving that humans could compete with anyone when they refused to give up. In the chamber next to him, Vexcrawl was experiencing something he had never felt before: doubt. For the first time in his life, he was facing the possibility of defeat. His perfect, crystal-structured mind couldn't handle the uncertainty that humans lived with every day. After 2 hours in the test of will, Vexcrawl collapsed. Jake emerged from his chamber exhausted but victorious. The arena erupted in chaos. Aliens from dozens of species were on their feet, cheering for the impossible victory they had just witnessed. The human team rushed onto the arena floor, lifting Jake into the air and celebrating like they had just won the most important competition in galactic history, because they had. Commander Vexcrawl approached Jake with slow, uncertain steps. His crystal skin had lost much of its glow, and his voice sounded hollow when he spoke. "I do not understand how this happened," he said. "You are weaker, slower, and smaller than Zephyrian warriors. How did you defeat me?" Jake smiled and put his hand on the alien's crystalline shoulder. "We're not stronger or faster," he agreed, "but we're human. We adapt, we endure, and we never give up. Those aren't weaknesses, Commander. They're our greatest strengths." As the celebration continued around him, Jake looked up at the purple sky and thought about what this victory would mean for humanity. Earth's athletes would return home with advanced training technology and, more importantly, with the respect of the entire galaxy. But the real victory wasn't the technology or the respect. It was the proof that being different didn't mean being inferior. Humans had their own unique strengths, and when they learned to use those strengths properly, they could accomplish anything. The galaxy had learned something new about the species from Earth. Humans might be weak individually, but together they were unstoppable.